I'm working in the New Perspectives Access 2007 textbook. I'm on page 353, and I'm going to create a custom report, a blank report, and I'm going to use a query as the record source for that report. I am using Office 2007 Service Pack 2. I've just installed it. I may see some changes, some differences on my screen than you're going to see in the book. And as I run across those, I will explain them to you. Okay, so starting here on page 353, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to run my query. I want to run the query because I want to make sure the query works. If the query doesn't work and I create a report based on that query, how am I going to know where my problem is? So if you're going to create an object based on another object like you normally do, make sure that the objects that form the basis for your form, your query, your report, work before you build another object on top of it. It works. And I'm just going to switch over to Design View here real quickly just to get an idea of what's involved in it. I've got 3 tables and a query, and it looks like 7 fields. I'm going to go ahead and close that. And I'm going to minimize or collapse some of these areas on my navigation pane, and then collapse my navigation pane or hide it. So I'm going to click on Create. And now I want to make sure that I'm over on blank report, not blank form. I'll click blank report. It will open up the blank report on my screen in layout view. It's going to give me the field list pane. If the field list pane does not open for you, don't worry about it. We'll come back to that later. Now the field list pane shows that there's no fields available for this current view. That's because we haven't created a record source. So the first thing we're going to do here is go create a record source. I'm going to click on Arrange. I'm going to open the property sheet. With the property sheet open, I have 2 options. I can go to the Data tab. Data tab is where I add the record source, the data that is going to be on my report, or I can go to the All tab. And on the All tab, I have the same options. But the Data tab is much shorter, easier to use. Record source is my first field. I'll click on Record Source. I'll click the drop-down arrow. I'm going to choose QRY Invoices by Item. And then I'm simply going to move down off that field. Now it's one of my habits that after I make a selection, I move down off from that property, I should say, not field. I move off from that property, just sort of sealing it, making sure that it sticks. Okay. Now when I go back to the Format tab and I click Add Existing Fields, I should see the fields that were in the query that I chose as a record source for this report. And there they are. So now what I'm going to do with them is I'm simply going to double click them in. So over on page 354, I'm going to choose Invoice Date, Customer, City, Contract Type, Invoice amount, and invoice paid. And I'm through with this list, so I'm going to go ahead and close it. Now this dotted line represents an 8-inch page width. Now I can come back later and change that. How do I know that? Because if I go in here to Design View, I'm going to see that my ruler's right there at 8 inches. So it represents an 8-inch page width. I don't want any controls to go past that. If I do, I'm going to have either an additional page, or I'm going to have to change my page widths and reduce my margins, change my orientation. We're going to do a lot of those things with this report. But right now, we're going to use that as our goal, and we don't want anything to go past it. Now, as we look at these fields, I want to, in Layout View, I adjust from left to right. In Design View, I often adjust from right to left. But we're in Layout View, and I'll show you why that I'll adjust from left to right. As I change this field width, it's going to move all of the other ones over. Now what I want to do here is I want to look first at my label, which says Invoice Date, and the values that are below that label. The date values that are below the invoice label will never be longer. Let's get rid of that screen. Never be longer, never be wider than the label. And so I can use the label as my guide. and I just need to make sure that I have plenty of room for invoice date, the label, to show. The data in the customer field is quite long. I'm going to end up wrapping that text. So right now I'm just going to guess a little bit and I'm going to bring it out. City. You don't want the values in the city field to wrap if possible. It just makes it harder to read. So I want my city field long enough so that all of my data values will display on one line. I don't want it to say East Lansing because we have a city named Lansing. And so if it says East on one line and wraps to the next line and says Lansing, when you're looking at it as a user, you could be confused by it. Contract type is also very long. I'm just going to pull it out a ways, and I'm going to come back to those customer contract type at a later time, and I'll continue to work with them. Invoice amount. I know that I'm going to total this. When I total it, I'm going to have values over $1 million. When I look at this right now, if I add an additional 2 numbers, a comma and a $sign, this field width is not wide enough, this column width. So I'm going to bring it out. I want to make sure that I have plenty of room. Now, invoice paid, this is going to be the one of the ones I work with last because I'm not too happy with the way it looks, but I'll work with that last. The book tells me to remove the word invoice. I'll do that. And click off from that, and I can bring this out a little more, and I'll bring this one out a little. If I bring this one out a little more, what's going to happen is paid might have gone past the end of the page. If it did, I'd need to adjust that. So far we're looking okay. So that's working. I'm going to go ahead and click save on this. I'm going to save it as RPT invoices by item. I'll say OK, and this will be the end of this segment. In the next segment, I will look at sorting and grouping data in a report.